The iron gates groaned as they opened, their black iron bars stretching wide like the arms of a giant. A long, winding driveway cut through an ocean of emerald grass, vanishing into the early morning mist. The air smelled faintly of rain and something else: money, power, and secrets. A single black sedan rolled forward, its tires crunching over the gravel. Inside sat a woman staring straight ahead, her posture steady, her hands folded calmly in her lap. Her name was Amara Lewis, and she had no idea that by the end of this day, she would be facing the most difficult challenges of her life, each challenge with a pair of wild eyes and a heart locked behind unbreakable walls. When the car stopped in front of the Harrington estate, Amara stepped out, her shoes touching the stone driveway with a quiet confidence. The house loomed above her, 3 stories of cold, perfect architecture, every window reflecting the gray morning sky. But as grand as it was, she could sense the silence here wasn't peaceful. It was the kind of silence that came from emptiness. Inside, the scent of polished wood and expensive perfume mixed with something less refined: spilled juice, damp clothes, the faint smoke of something burnt. The grand hallway opened into a living room, and that was where Amara saw them for the first time. 4 boys, for Storms, standing in the center of the room. The oldest, maybe 8 or 9, glared at her with eyes that dared her to move closer. His jaw was tight, his small fists clenched, and though he said nothing, his presence spoke of someone who had been forced to grow up too soon. Beside him stood another boy, a year or 2 younger, arms crossed over his chest like he was guarding something, maybe himself. On the couch, a 3rd child drummed his fingers against the cushion with restless energy, his gaze darting around the room like he was ready to run at any moment. And the youngest stood barefoot on the coffee table, a defiant spark in his eyes, as if the entire world was his battlefield. Around them was chaos: drawings scribbled across the white walls, cushions torn open, a rug twisted in a heap. A vase lay shattered near the fireplace, the pieces glinting like ice on the hardwood floor. "You won't last," the oldest finally said, his voice sharp for someone so young. Amara met his gaze without flinching. "Maybe not," she said softly, "but you don't know me yet." The second boy narrowed his eyes. "None of them last. You'll run like the others, maybe," she replied, taking a slow step forward. "But I'm not here to win a race. I'm here because someone thinks you're worth staying for." The youngest hopped off the table, tilting his head like he was trying to figure her out. "Why would you stay? We're bad." Amara crouched down so she could see them all at their level. Her voice was calm, steady, but carried something deeper: understanding. "I've met bad. You're not bad. You're hurt. There's a difference." The oldest's face tightened, as though her words had struck somewhere he didn't want anyone to touch. For a moment, none of them spoke. The air felt heavier, like the house itself was holding its breath. Then, heavy footsteps echoed from the hallway behind her, slow, tired, weighted with something more than exhaustion. The boys shifted instantly, shoulders tensing, eyes flickering. Toward the doorway, a tall man appeared, dressed in a suit that looked more like armor than clothing. His dark hair was perfectly combed, but his eyes were shadowed and weary. He took in the scene: the torn cushions, the marks on the wall, the stranger standing in his living room, and his expression didn't change. But something in the air did. He looked at Amara as if she were a problem to be solved, another temporary face that would disappear before the week was over. But Amara didn't break her gaze. She stood there in the quiet wreckage of his home and smiled, not a timid smile, but one that said, "I'm not afraid of the storm you've built here." In that moment, she knew one thing: this wasn't going to be a job. It was going to be a battle, and she had no intention of losing. The man's eyes lingered on her a second too long, as if trying to place her in a category. Most newcomers fit neatly into one of 2, the timid ones who backed away at the first hint of trouble, or the stubborn ones who mistook pride for patience. Amara's steady gaze didn't match either. It unsettled him. "You're the new caretaker," he said finally, his voice low, controlled. "I am," Amara replied, matching his tone. "And you must be Mr. Harrington." His jaw flexed. "I don't need you to introduce yourself. I need you to keep them in order." Amara glanced at the 4 boys, who were now huddled together in a silent alliance. watching this exchange like spectators at a match. Keeping them in order isn't the same as keeping them safe, she said quietly. Something flickered in his expression, too quick to name before his voice returned to its even, business-like rhythm. You have until the end of the week. If they're not manageable, we'll end this arrangement. Is that clear? Perfectly, she said. His gaze lingered on her one last time before he turned and walked down the hall, his footsteps fading into the distance. The moment he was gone, the room seemed to exhale. The youngest boy, the one who had stood barefoot on the table earlier, darted toward the kitchen with the speed of a runaway train. The second oldest dropped onto the couch with a smirk that looked too old for his face. The oldest crossed his arms, never breaking eye contact with her. You should leave now, he said again, almost as if he was doing her a favor. Amara didn't move toward the door. Instead, she walked over to the pile of shattered vase pieces on the floor. She knelt down, gathered the largest fragments, and set them gently on the coffee table. You know what I see when I look at this? She asked. The middle boy shrugged. A broken vase, no, Amara said softly. I see something that could still be made into something new. It won't look the same, but it could still be beautiful. They stared at her, unsure whether she was talking about the vase or them. She rose to her feet, brushed the dust from her hands, and looked around the room. By the end of today, she said, her voice steady but filled with a promise they couldn't quite understand yet, I'll show you why I'm still here. The boys didn't answer, but their silence wasn't the cold, distant kind from before. It was curious, cautious, the first crack in a wall built far too young. Amara knew enough about walls to recognize when one had started to shift, and she also knew one thing with absolute certainty. Once a wall begins to move, it never stays in place for long. Somewhere deep in the house, a door slammed. The sound startled even her, and when she glanced at the boys, she saw something that would anchor her decision to stay. Not defiance this time, but a flash of fear they couldn't hide. She didn't know yet what storms this family had weathered, but she intended to find out before the week was over. Asterisk morning light spilled through the tall windows, cutting across the living room in pale stripes. Amara had been awake for hours, listening to the quiet rustle of the estate. She expected the boys to be asleep. She was wrong. She found them in the backyard, barefoot in the wet grass, whispering to each other as if planning a secret mission. The oldest noticed her first and straightened, his expression unreadable. You're up early, Amara said. We're always up early, he replied. Gives us more time before the rules start. Something in his voice made her pause. Who told you mornings have to start with rules? Before he could answer, the youngest, still damp-haired from the grass, held up a garden hose. Without warning, a stream of cold water rushed toward her. She didn't flinch. She didn't even step back. The middle boys watched, waiting for her to shout or storm off like others before her had done. But instead, Amara walked forward through the spray until she stood in front of the youngest. She gently took the hose, turned it toward the flower beds, and said, if you're going to get someone wet, at least make sure the plants get a drink, too. The smallest boy blinked, clearly thrown off. You're not mad, she smiled. Not yet. They weren't done testing her. When breakfast came, one boy dumped a handful of cereal onto the table instead of a bowl. Another dragged his spoon through the milk until it spilled onto the floor. The oldest sat back, arms folded, watching to see how far she would bend before she broke. Amara cleaned the spill without a word, then set down a fresh bowl in front of the boy who had made the mess. Try again, she said simply. He stared at her, not used to being given another chance instead of a punishment. By mid-morning, their games escalated. A soccer ball rolled past her feet in the hallway. She picked it up just as she heard hurried footsteps behind her. When she turned, the boy stood there, expectant. Keep it, the oldest said. Bet you can't score a goal. Her brow lifted. Is that a challenge? They led her outside to the makeshift field they had created on the back lawn. The grass was uneven. The goal nothing more than to overturn buckets. The boys were fast, their laughter sharp in the air as they darted around her. But Amara matched their energy, running barefoot in the damp grass, stealing the ball when they least expected it. When she finally scored, the youngest shouted, that doesn't count. You're a grown-up. Then you'd better beat me next time, she said with a grin. Something changed in their faces just for a second. It wasn't trust yet, but it was the first flicker of something softer than suspicion. Inside, from an upstairs window, a figure watched them. Mr. Harrington's expression was unreadable, but he stayed there longer than he intended, his gaze lingering on the sight of his sons running and laughing in a way he hadn't seen in months. Back on the lawn, Amara noticed him in the window but said nothing. She only knew that if she was going to reach these boys, she had to keep showing up every single day, no matter what they threw her way. And something told her they hadn't even started yet. Asterisk rain hammered the estate that afternoon, the kind of steady downpour that seemed to trap every sound inside the house. Amara was in the library, sorting through a stack of children's books she had found abandoned in a storage room, when she noticed the silence, with 4 boys in the house. Silence was never a good sign. She found them in the upstairs hallway, huddled together, whispering with that particular mischief that only came before a storm. The moment they saw her, they scattered like startled birds, disappearing into separate rooms. It started with a crash from the kitchen. By the time she reached it, flour dust hung in the air like fog, coating the counters, the floor, and one very guilty-looking boy. "I was baking," he said, his eyes darting away. Before she could answer, a loud thud came from the living room. She hurried there to find couch cushions, stacked into a tower high enough for one of them to leap from the second-floor railing into the pile, and then came the water. Someone had plugged the bathroom sink upstairs and left the tap running. By the time she found it, water had spilled across the tiled floor and was dripping into the hallway carpet. It was a perfect storm. Every trick, every mess, all in the same hour. Most people would have shouted. Most people would have walked away. But Amara didn't raise her voice. She moved through each disaster calmly, shutting off the tap, wiping the water, pulling down the cushion tower, dusting flour off countertops. The boys followed her from room to room, waiting for the moment she'd snap. They wanted to see it, needed to see it, because if she snapped, it meant she was like everyone else, someone who wouldn't stay. When the youngest spilled a cup of juice right in front of her on purpose, Amara finally stopped. She crouched down so her eyes were level with his. "You think if you make enough mess, I'll get tired and leave," she said softly. He didn't answer, but his small shoulders tensed. "Well, here's the truth," she continued. "You can spill every cup in this kitchen, break every dish in the cupboard, and I'll still be here tomorrow." The oldest, standing in the doorway, frowned. "Why? You don't even know us." Amara looked at him for a long moment. "Not yet, but I know what it's like to have someone walk away when you needed them the most. And I promised myself once I'd never be that person." For a few seconds, no one moved. The rain pounded harder against the windows, filling the silence. Then the middle boy spoke for the first time that day. "They all say that," he murmured. "Every one of them. And then they go." Amara smiled sadly. "Then I guess I'll just have to be the first one who doesn't." From somewhere deep inside, they wanted to believe her, but believing was dangerous. Trust was dangerous. So they didn't answer. Yet later, when she went to tidy the library, she found 4 damp footprints leading in from the hall, stopping right in front of the stack of books she'd left on the floor. And one of them, the top one, was open, as if someone had been reading. She didn't touch it. She only smiled. It was small, but it was a start. The rain had passed overnight, leaving the air heavy and the garden sparkling with droplets that clung to every leaf. Morning sunlight poured into the kitchen, but the warmth in the room came from somewhere else, an unspoken shift that Amara had felt since last night. The boys were quieter at breakfast. Not calm, never calm, but different. Their eyes followed her as she moved around the kitchen, and when she set a plate in front of each of them, none of them tried to spill it or still. Walls like theirs didn't crumble in a day. Midway through the meal, the phone rang. Amara answered, her voice steady, her back turned. She didn't notice the oldest boy slip out of his chair and wander toward the garden. By the time she hung up, he was gone. She found him sitting under the old oak tree, at the far edge of the lawn, knees pulled to his chest, eyes fixed on the ground. "Ethan," she said gently. He didn't look up. "It's not my birthday, I know," she replied. easing herself down onto the grass beside him. He picked at the hem of his sleeve. Everyone keeps asking me what I want for my birthday, but no one asks what I wanted last year. Amara stayed quiet, letting him decide if he wanted to keep going. Finally, he spoke, his voice low but sharp. Last year, I wanted her to come back. It wasn't the first time she'd heard a child speak of loss, but there was something in his tone, a raw, hollow ache that told her this was more than just missing someone she used to sit here. He continued, glancing up at the branches above them. Every Sunday, we'd read. She always said the tree was older than all of us put together. Amara followed his gaze, her eyes tracing the thick branches swaying gently in the breeze. She sounds like someone who loved you very much. She did. His jaw tightened. And then she left. And everyone pretends it doesn't hurt anymore. Dad buries himself in work. Logan acts like he doesn't care. Caleb and Micah just break things. But it's still here. He pressed a hand to his chest. All the time. Amara's instinct was to tell him it would get better. But she knew better than to promise something she couldn't control. I can't bring her back, she said softly, and I can't make the hurt disappear. But I can sit here with you, and I can listen. Every time you want to talk about her, I'll be here. He finally looked at her, searching her face for the slightest sign of a lie. When he didn't find one, he gave the smallest nod, barely there, but real. The sound of footsteps broke the moment. Logan appeared at the edge of the garden, pretending to be annoyed. Dad's looking for you, he told Ethan, but his eyes flicked to Amara, and for the briefest second, she thought she saw relief in them as they walked back toward the house. Ethan slowed his pace until he was beside her. You don't give up easily, do you? He asked. Not when something matters, she replied. Inside, Mr. Harrington stood in the hallway, phone in hand, watching them. He didn't speak, but his gaze lingered on the way Ethan stayed close to her, his shoulders not as tense as they had been just days before. It was the first crack in the oldest boy's armor. Amara knew if she could reach him, the others might follow. What she didn't know was that the real test, the one that would decide whether she stayed or left, was already on its way. And it would come faster than any of them expected. The storm came without warning, though this one wasn't. In the sky. It was late afternoon when the front gates clanged open, and two strangers stepped onto the property. They were reporters, cameras slung over their shoulders, voices sharp and eager. Amara caught sight of them through the kitchen window just as they started toward the house. Within seconds, the boys were in the hallway, drawn by the commotion. Mr. Harrington appeared at the top of the stairs, his expression darkening as he descended. What are they doing here? Ethan whispered, his eyes darting toward Amara. The answer came quickly. One of the reporters raised her voice just enough. To Carrie, we have questions about your late wife, Mr. Harrington. Rumors about her disappearance, the court case, the settlement, inside. Now, Mr. Harrington ordered the boys. His tone was firm, but Amara saw the tightness in his jaw, the way his hand trembled just slightly, instead of retreating. The boys hesitated. Micah clung to Ethan's shirt. Caleb's face had gone pale. This wasn't curiosity, they were afraid. Amara stepped forward before Mr. Harrington could say another word. She moved between the family and the reporters, her voice calm but unyielding. This is private property. Leave now. The cameraman lifted his lens. Why? Afraid of what the world will find out. Amara didn't flinch. Afraid? No. Protective? Absolutely. She glanced back at the boys, her eyes softening. These children have already lost enough. You don't get to take anything else from them. There was a beat of silence. Then the front door closed behind her words, the heavy latch sealing away the noise. The living room was still. The boys looked at her like she had done something impossible. Even Mr. Harrington's gaze was different, sharper, but not in the way it had been before. You didn't have to do that, he said finally. Yes, Amara replied. I did. Later that night, when the house had gone quiet, Ethan found her in the library. He lingered in the doorway, shuffling his feet before stepping closer. They were here last year too, he said. That time, no one stopped them. Amara set aside the book she'd been holding. Not anymore, she said. Something shifted in his expression, the last piece of suspicion falling away. I guess You weren't lying, he murmured. The next morning, she woke to find the boys already at the kitchen table, bowls set neatly, spoons waiting. No mess, no chaos, just for pairs of eyes watching her with something she had never seen from them before. Trust. It wasn't loud or dramatic, it didn't come with fanfare, but it was real. Mr. Harrington appeared in the doorway, his hands in his pockets. They seem to like you, he said quietly, almost as if it surprised him. Amara smiled. It's not about them liking me, it's about them believing someone's going to stay. He didn't answer, but his eyes softened in a way she hadn't seen before. For the first time since she'd arrived, the house didn't feel like a battlefield. It felt like the beginning of something worth fighting for, and Amara knew deep down that whatever storms came next, they would face them together, not as strangers bound by a job, but as a family learning to heal.